Early this morning, I clicked on the CNN link that said, "These are the 17 lives that were taken." I decided to look at each photo and read the name, because I didn't want to distance myself from the tragedy. I didn't want to write it off as just yet another school shooting. The 17 people to most of the country are names and faces taken in another senseless act of violence. But to their families, they are sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, coaches and teachers. There's not a parent in this room who doesn't want to distance themselves from the unimaginable. Our gospel text begins with "A certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany." To us, just a name and a story. Long ago. To most people, just another one of those biblical characters. But to Mary and Martha, he was their brother, the one whom they loved. To Jesus, he was his friend. They were part of a chosen family, this Mary, Martha, Lazarus, and Jesus. But this well-known gospel text is about every family, because every family has suffered loss. Not most of us in the magnitude of those who grieve so deeply in Florida today, but every family has suffered loss. And how is it that we deal with that loss? There's a great Buddhist story about a woman named Kisa who lost her son. And she went from house to house. She couldn't bear it. She couldn't believe it. She went from house to house looking for a miracle. She was relentless. And finally, someone said to her, after the 30th or 40th house she had visited, "Go see the Buddha. Go to the Buddha himself." So Kisa went to the Buddha himself. And the Buddha very compassionately said to her, "Kisa, there's one way to solve your problem. Go from house to house and find a house that has not suffered the death of one person or another, and collect 4 mustard seeds." Well, she, with great hope, ran again from house to house in search of these mustard seeds. And after visiting so many houses and still coming away empty-handed, she began to enfold her grief in compassion and to understand that she was not alone in her suffering, that loss is sown in the fabric of every life, of every family. After being your senior minister for so many years now, all I need do is glance across the faces in the congregation, and I know your stories of loss, and you know some of mine. In the Christian story, Mary and Martha are the same. They want to hope for a miracle. They're sure that Jesus can fix it. There was Mary, the one who would anoint Jesus with perfume, washing his feet with her hair. Mary, the one who had lavished her brother with such care and sympathy, but it had not made him well. And then there was Martha, who ran around, got the medications, cleaned the house, did all the errands, but all her doing had not made him well. Nothing was helping, so they sent a message to their friend, their teacher. "Jesus, the one whom you love, is ill." Whom you love, not a general love in the way Jesus loved all, but in a very specific friendship, familial love. This is our story. It's your story, because all of us have loved people who were ill, and all of us have been powerless in the face of illness, powerless in the face of death. In fact, I don't think there's anything as sharp, as acute, as the powerlessness we feel in the face of death. Am I right? This story is also a story of how we as people and families deal with death, how we deal with loss and grief, how we deal with illness, doubt. It reveals how we blame God and others when we feel powerless. It really tells our own story of the many times we had said, if only I had done this, this, and this, that wouldn't have happened. Or if only you had done this, this, and this, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, think about the responses to Parkland, Florida. We want to blame, right? Read the articles. We want to blame the FBI because they knew about this person. We want to blame the government. We want to blame the NRA. I'm not saying there's not plenty of responsibility to go around. And then you hear the friend saying, I lost touch. If only I had been in touch, maybe I could have stopped this. When Jesus finally arrives, that's what they say to him. If only you had been here. Why did you stay longer? Our brother would not have died. Perhaps some of you have seen the movie 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. A few of you have seen that. Really, the movie is about what we do with unspeakable grief and incomprehensible loss. The movie really is this slow and very messy journey to a type of redemption, perhaps, that is heart-wrenching at moments and breathtakingly beautiful at others. In the movie, Mildred, played by the great actress Frances McDormand, lost her daughter in a horrific crime. And Mildred is bound by her loss. You see, in this story, friends, Lazarus isn't the only one bound. Because at some level, all the characters are bound by their loss. Because it's human. It's what we do. In fact, loss is often writ large over our lives. We move through life and everything is changing all the time. It's exhausting sometimes. We're afraid to love because we might lose. Loss, death, illness, aging. We grieve for what never was, and we grieve for what was. We grieve the childhood we had or the childhood we didn't have. We grieve the relationships we had or the relationships we never had. It's not a judgment, it's just an observation that loss shapes our identity. And you might say, well, you know, everybody's different, every family's different. You don't know what my family was like. Well, I'll just quote the poet and memorist Mary Carr. A dysfunctional family is any family with more than one person in it. So we're all together here. The great contemplative monk, Thomas Merton, talks about it in this way. He says, every one of us is shadowed by an illusory person, a false self. I wind my experiences around myself and cover myself with glory like bandages in order to make myself perceptible to myself and to the world, as if I were an invisible body that could only become visible when something visible covered its surface. Sometimes I think we wind our losses around us like bandages. But I'm here to tell you a truth today, another truth about loss. And if you've listened to me over the years, you will know this is true, that I believe with all my heart that nothing is lost forever. That's another truth about loss. Nothing is lost forever. We began Ash Wednesday with a quote from Jan Richardson. We are entering the season that begins with a smudge. That smudge is a testimony to what survives. It is a witness to what abides when everything seems lost. It is a sign that we know. It is a sign what we know and love may for a time be reduced to dust, but it does not disappear. Ash Wednesday, a reminder, a testimony to what remains. I come back to an experience that I had that I've mentioned before, and it's still so visceral to me. It speaks to me so much that nothing is lost forever. It was at a memorial service for my friend Susan Conrad, the late partner of Diane Calliam. And we had her service in a place that she loved the most, in the Aspens in Tahoe. It was early October, but it had already snowed. And there were about 20 of us, and we walked or trudged silently through that October snow into the grove of aspens. You could still hear the leaves rustling a bit in the trees. On the way in silence, a yellow snake went right before my feet in the snow. Already a sign that something mystical was going to happen. And in the many memorial services that I've done over the years, often there was an urn, beautiful reverential urn with a person's ashes. But no, not in this case. In the middle of that grove of aspens was a big, beautiful bowl, open, full of Susan's ashes. And we told stories about her. And at the end of the service, all of us were invited to go and put our hands in those ashes of what remains and scoop them up and have our own moment. And even though being well acquainted with death and with sorrow and with grief and with memories and with messiness, took me a moment. Took me a moment to go ahead and reach in. And as I scooped up the testimony to what remains, and in silence walked to a tree to spread those ashes, my first thought was, this is it? This is what remains? But as I began to let go, the residue still on my hands, I began to be overcome with what did remain. The wool hats that she knit for hundreds of chemo patients that lost their hair. The money she raised by doing triathlons for research for lymphoma and leukemia. The inspiration that she provided to many as she mentored them in their journey. the way that she beat the odds and didn't live 7 to 10 years, but lived 14. What remains? A lot. What remains? Her courage that to this day spurs me on. What remains? The memories that we share as chosen family. Because nothing is lost forever. Maybe that's the whole point of this story. Maybe that's whatever happened, the point of the story when Lazarus comes out from the tomb. Maybe that's the whole point. Maybe it's not about raising from the dead, because that's not in our experience really, is it? Maybe it's about that nothing is lost forever. The love that you share, the memories that you make, the way you inspire each other, nothing can take that away. Lazarus comes out to a testimony of what remains. And the secret of the blessing is that it is written on the back of what binds you. So if you are bound by loss, the blessing, the life, the love is on the back of what binds you. Losses are part of us, but they needn't bind us. And you and I could be anyone in the story. We could be Mary and Martha dealing with loss. We could be Jesus. Or we could be Lazarus. Because here's the deal. We hear the story, and the story is told from outside the tomb, the cave. That's where it all happened. But sometimes, so it's easy to hear, come out! But sometimes, we're the one in the tomb. And all we hear is, oh. Nearly indecipherable. But Lazarus too had a choice, just like we do. To step forth to the other side of loss, which is life, living fully, courageously loving, believing nothing is lost forever. And the community is here to help unbind you, and the voice of love is calling your name, however muffled it might sound. Calling your name, saying, love again, extravagantly. Live again, boldly. Because nothing is lost forever. Amen.